Welcome to Map Design 101, where we talk about the finer details of map and area design to show how they make the gaming experience better or worse. Whether you're a designer or merely want to know why you love or hate the maps you do, this resource is for you. This week we're taking on the idea of monotype maps, maps that feature primarily or solely one type of unit. What makes them interesting, boring, frustrating, or terrifying, and why I think a good monotype map can be the perfect showcase of what your game is all about. Monotype maps are fairly common throughout the series. Most Fire Emblem games begin with maps featuring mostly, if not entirely, pirates, fighters, or brigands, and many have at least one map in the mid or late game highlighting a new, fearsome type of enemy. When considering map design, you have multiple avenues to drive engagement and force particular strategies, from objectives to terrain to enemy type and placement. By removing some of these considerations, a map designer can narrow down the effective strategies available to the player, thus highlighting what the core set of optimal interactions can become. For instance, the cave maps in Gaiden limit both the enemy type and available terrain, having your army fight a group of one type of foe in a small, featureless square map. This directly exposes the matchups your units have against the enemy type being fought. Zombies are easy for anyone to fight, but skeletons have higher defense and speed. Gargoyles are incredibly fast and mobile, and Neko Dragons are made of nightmares. But not all monotype maps are empty squares. Most exist as a showcase of their featured foe, and either highlight their strengths or emphasize their weaknesses. Take the opening pirate or brigand maps we mentioned earlier. Pirates generally have slow, inaccurate attacks with low defense but decent hit points. This means a new player will immediately be able to see the difference in attack strength of their units, while still requiring at least 2 rounds of combat for most of their units to take one down. Their low accuracy also means players get a noticeable increase in evasion from any terrain features they use. In games with a weapon triangle, the Lord and Cavalier's swords will be highlighted against the bandits' axes, providing an extra boost similar to that of terrain. Bandits can also be given hand axes to teach the player to look at inventories and be aware of indirect attacks. All in all, a very good starter enemy, and a good monotype brigand map acts as a hidden tutorial, teaching all of these things to the player without necessarily having to say everything explicitly in a text box. The mid-game monotype maps are more of a mixed bag. Because the player's army is more developed at this point, and they are used to tackling multiple different strategic objectives every map, having a single, drawn-out encounter with only one enemy type can easily become either boring if the player is prepared for it, or infuriating if they are not. Wooden Cavalry in Fire Emblem 11 showcases this boring to frustrating arc perfectly. While the original Fire Emblem 1 incarnation ballistas had 2 range, just like any other archer, Fire Emblem 11 gives ballistas 3 to 10 range without changing the structure of the map at all. As such, especially on higher difficulties, this map becomes either a free win or a frustrating mess, depending on how the player has progressed through the game. If the player has been relying on forged effective weaponry like the Wing Spear, they may be frustrated that ballistas are not vulnerable to any type of weapon beyond the Thunderbolt, which is first available on a unit recruited on the middle of the map. If the player has been relying on flying units, they may be frustrated by the Aerospate's effective damage. If they have been relying on powerful player phase nukes like mages, the massive range of ballistas will prevent their mages from approaching. However, if the player has been using defensive super tanks, such as General reclassed Wolf or Sedgar, the map will be a boring slog of moving their general forward through a storm of projectiles and eventually clearing a path. Or, a player may decide that this isn't worth it, and simply use a warp staff to skip to killing the boss and capturing the gate, a strategy that Fire Emblem 11 barely restricts with limited staff uses, so the player cannot simply skip every map in the game on a single run. While warp skipping and map play incentives are a topic for another day, the fact that Wooden Cavalry is often considered one of the worst maps in the entire game, possibly the entire series, is because none of the ideal play patterns it presents to the player are particularly reliable or enjoyable. The 310 range ballistician is simply not an enemy type designed to make up the overwhelming majority of foes on a map made up of 3 straight lines. While the original Fire Emblem 1 incarnation does have its own issues, the FE1 Ballista is more well designed as a practical challenge to the player on this map. With very high defense but limited offense, this map forces players to use high strength or magical weapons to overcome it. Javelins and hand axes will fail to do significant damage except when used by invested, powerful promoted units. Silver weapons, Levin swords, Excalibur, Aura, and the Devil Axe are the only truly viable options against the low hit point, high defense enemies. But the player can also utilize mobility to their advantage to outrun the ballistas, and since they are locked to 2 range, the player can at least surround them or slowly chip them down in melee without taking counters. The map's 3 narrow lanes also make more sense in Fire Emblem 1, forcing players to fight the ballistas head-on instead of just running around them with high mobility units. This map is a strength check, making sure the player knows about and is using stronger weapons and magic before forcing them to fight more than 1 or 2 enemies per map that are doing the same. Another monotype map that gives players headaches is Chapter 3-6 in Radiant Dawn. Micaiah and the Dawn Brigade are trapped on a small island in the southwest, with an endless tide of lagoos coming through the swamp. The goal is simple: defeat a set number of enemies. The problem? Transformed lagoos are among the highest statted enemies the player has seen in the campaign, and they are fighting as the Dawn Brigade, a group of units the player hasn't been using since the end of Act 1, and which are likely significantly weaker than the Grail mercenaries the player was just using last chapter. The solution? Well, there are several possibilities. Depending on the level of preparation players made in Part 1, they may have a unit or 2 capable of fighting toe-to-toe with several lagoos per turn. The player also has access to a variety of powerful weapons, a Beast Killer dagger, and even a Master Crown from the base conversation and shops. The water on the map slows enemy progress so that, as long as the player is able to kill at least a few lagoos each turn, they are unlikely to get overwhelmed. There are also yellow directable ally units that can help out on early turns or be directed to plug holes in your defensive line. Chipping down enemies or delaying them also forces their lagoos gauge to deplete, meaning you are practically guaranteed to be able to finish off any enemy eventually. And, as a failsafe, the immortal Black Knight spawns on turn 4, capable of one-rounding just about every unit on the map while never taking any damage in return. The game is well aware that this is the biggest difficulty spike it has to offer, so it makes sure to give players as many tools as it reasonably can to become equal to the task. Additionally, both the fish-out-of-water feeling of the weak Dawn Brigade joining a full-blown war, and the mechanical monotony of slogging through wave after wave of generic samey enemies, reinforce the emotional feel that the game is trying to create in the player. That this isn't in any way an honorable war or something to cheer, it is a slog of butchery and cruelty that nobody is happy about, but that everyone, including the player, is being forced to be subjected to. Say what you will about some of the writing and reasoning behind it, the ludonarrative on display here is Spec Ops The Line level of deliberate. Another map full of shapeshifter butchery in an unfun slog is Kitsune Lair, Chapter 19 of Fire Emblem Conquest. The terrain is nothing special, a few peaks only traversable by flying units, a scattering of mountain and forest tiles, and some trees that can be attacked to form bridges across a river. The enemies are all Kitsune, fast, one-range beasts that deal effective damage against other beast units, most notably cavalry and pegasi. Many of them also have pass, meaning your squishier units will need to be fully surrounded or risk instant death. The main gimmick of the map, and what turns this from a common chain of lure and overwhelm encounters into an enemy phase hellscape, is that many of these Kitsune will go into Mirage status after moving, making them completely untargetable on player phase, but becoming active again on enemy phase. This means that one of the core strategies the player has been taught to rely on for the entire game, the lure and overwhelm, becomes entirely unusable because of a mechanic that has never existed before and will never appear again. Additionally, many of the strongest defensive units a player has by default, including Xander, Silas, Leo, and any armored promoted to Great Knight, will be taking effective damage if not reclassed, a death sentence in any Fire Emblem game. The solution? Either fly all of your units onto the peaks and rain death from above with a Kinshi Knight, Malignite, or Dark Flyer, or reclass 4 units to Wyverns or bulky infantry, move in formation around Elise or another Aura or Rally bot, and slowly slog your way through wave after wave of Kitsune. You can beat the map with a more conventional army, sure, but your positioning will need to be perfect to avoid losing a unit to pass, or failing to kill everyone before they go into Mirage and flank your army from an indefensible angle. The one thing the map has going for it is that it does still create a ludonarrative that the Kitsune are to be feared. Except, instead of feeling bad for having to kill them like the characters are in the story, the player will likely be feeling a bit more justified in their wholesale slaughter after putting up with their Mirage Pass shenanigans than the writers seem to want them to be. The restriction of obstacles in a map down to a specific subset is a tool that needs to be used carefully. One can consider a monotype map as if a single encounter on a normal map was blown up to be an entire map in and of itself. When done well, monotype maps can teach the player skills, reinforce desirable play patterns, or reinforce a deliberate narrative. When done poorly, however, monotype maps only serve to frustrate the player, throw out a majority of their ability to interact with the game, or be just incredibly uninteresting. Thank you for watching Map Design 101. I have not been able to record as much recently, so I really appreciate everyone's continued support, especially to the YouTube channel members who kept supporting me through the small break in uploads. That includes Royal Legoosguard members, The Forgotten L and Minirop, and Legoosguard members L, Enigmatic Mr. L, Mad Moke, Bro Duderman, Kumi, Miss Mesmerism, Drumstep913, Relaz6, Merlinin, and Reilly. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, this is Mithril Zenith signing out.